This is Rebase.
So what do you do for a living? Oh yeah? How's that? These are questions you hear on a regular basis. And maybe you used to answer with excitement, with passion, with joy, but now you dread even answering the question. Well, I'm here to tell you this is not a show that's going to tell you how to quit your job and start a new company. Maybe that's not for everybody. It is, however, a show that will help you to rediscover your purpose, that passion, that joy, and that fulfillment in what it is you do. Or, if nothing else, you might figure out what it is you should be doing on a daily basis. This is Rebase. We're here to help you transform your career and change your life.
Hello again, and welcome to the Rebase Show, where it is my job to transform your career in order to fundamentally change your life. This episode is a recording of a talk that I've given on multiple occasions, and in this particular case, I gave it to a leadership special interest group here in Austin, Texas, and that leadership group is primarily focused on, you guessed it, leading people in better ways. And the topic that I presented was how to deal with difficult people, or more importantly, how to deal with difficult behavior. This is a topic that I've been exploring for several months. I've given various trainings and presentations on the topic, and this is a 1 hour long, edited down for content version of that training. Without further ado, I hope you find some value in it. I hope you pull one or two things out of it that you may use, and I hope that you can find something in there to apply to your daily life. So once again, without further ado, here's my presentation on how to deal with difficult behavior.
That's all I have for all the announcements and whatnot. I'm going to turn it over to Sean. He's going to get started.
Not Jason.
Not Jason.
I strive to be Jason, but I'm not Jason.
Everyone, Sean.
Hi, guys. Thank you. So, that's an inside joke. Max, for months, thought that Jason was giving this talk, and even though Jason told him about 6 times that it was me giving this talk, so I got these slides a couple days ago, and it still said Jason. So if you don't have an index card, there's some up here. There should be some on some of the tables. This is mostly a nice to have for me. I'm curious about who the most difficult people that you work with are and how that reflects on your role. So do Scrum Masters typically have the most difficult time with product managers or with executives? Do developers have the most difficult time with other types of folks? Just to see if there's any trends, because honestly, just a professional curiosity. Cool, so we will get into it, assuming that this continues to work. There we go. Awesome. So today we're going to talk about how to deal with difficult behavior. This is actually part 1 of a kind of a 2-part presentation. It was originally a training session that I did for some of my team leads and then some managers in other departments at USHIP. And I took a 2-hour training and whittled it down into this 1-hour training, so then there's another part after that, but I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. And if at any time while I'm talking, you can raise your hand and definitely ask questions. We'll try to go through everything. And I'll try to move as quickly as possible. I do talk fast, so if you need me to repeat something or I'm just annoying you for talking fast, definitely let me know. So a few disclaimers. Might be some colorful language. I don't really change my personality or who I am between work and not work, and so sometimes things slip out. So I apologize if that offends you, but I'm trying to be as authentic as I possibly can be. So that's disclaimer number 1. And you're gonna learn some things today on how to hopefully deal with people who are being difficult, and that you actually can change people's behavior in this way, and you can get them on the same page as you. So just use it ethically and use it for good and not evil. With great power comes great responsibility. Cool, so who am I? How did I stumble upon this topic? Where did the information come from? Did I make it up? Did I find it somewhere else? Why are we here? Why are you guys here? Why am I asking so many questions? So again, my name is Sean Martin. I'm the Senior Director of Software Development at UShip. I've been Director at UShip for 2.5 years. Originally started at UShip in 2011 as a Senior Developer. Quickly took on some management responsibilities, some team lead responsibilities, some training, and then moved into the Director position 2.5 years ago. And what I stumbled upon, pretty much starting with people management and then moving into this executive position, is that people problems are a totally different beast than technical software problems. And I'm sure you are all aware of that. It's not news to you, but they require an entirely different skill set, right, than solving technical problems, than building product, shipping product. But still, at the time, when I started to come to this realization, I figured there has to be some kind of frameworks out there similar to frameworks for developing software and solving technical problems. So what's out there, right? About 1.5 years ago, my manager turned me on to a great book called Dealing with People You Can't Stand. And I'll get into the book in a second, but it's a fantastic book with a hideous cover, but amazing content inside. It's actually probably the quintessential don't judge a book by its cover. But it goes into some of these topics like blending, redirecting. It goes over different personality types and archetypes, which I'm sure you see in other frameworks that do that. This one really spoke to me. And as I'm reading this book, I started to make some connections with some other things that I learned over the years. In particular, something that I was exposed to when I was turned on to Tony Robbins' work. And he has a framework that he talks about around the 6 basic human needs that people have. And I started seeing relationships between those needs and some of the intents that they outline in dealing with people you can't stand. So I started kind of drawing those connections, and it just helped me to understand it a lot better. Hopefully, it'll help you as well. So again, I am not a psychologist. I am not a multimillionaire, 6'8" coach, performance coach. So this is where this information came from. I simply kind of combined some of it and have been using it pretty effectively, I feel like, with my team leads, product managers, scrum masters, and then again, some people managers in our customer success department, our sales department. People have responded pretty positively to the training that I did, which this is kind of adopted from. And I'll definitely share the slides after this so that you guys can link to the book. And then I think Tony Robbins originally outlined the 6 human needs at his TED Talk in 2004. It was one of the first ever TED Talks, actually. It's kind of interesting to see how far they've come. So I've already mentioned a few of our key terms that we're gonna kind of go over here. And different frameworks just use different branding and different words for these things. So when we're talking about needs, these are just feelings that people are striving to feel, right? Intents, we'll get into. People typically operate with a primary intent. You can interchange intent and motivation. What's their motivation? This is pretty simple stuff, but I just want to make sure, in case you've read other work that's similar to this, we're kind of speaking the same language. And then the concept of blending, if you have a sales background at all, you've probably heard people talk about mirroring people's behavior. This is very similar to mirroring behavior as well. So goals. I've got a couple goals. I want you guys to have a good time. I want to not completely bomb and have technical failures and everything else. I want you to learn something, but most importantly, I want you to have an action that you can take leaving this meeting. Because if there's one thing I've learned is that you can read all the books in the world, you can watch all the videos, listen to all the podcasts, but then within 30 days, 14 days, if you don't apply it, you probably have forgotten most of it. So we're gonna do an exercise real quick. Give you guys about 2 minutes, and I want you to turn to the person next to you. I want you to tell them your name, and you can tell them what your position is, and then tell them what you had for dinner last night and where, and tell them what your next trip or vacation is going to be. And if you don't have a trip or a vacation plan, make something up. cool. And then switch, obviously. All right, guys. Thanks, y'all. I hope that you got to know somebody that you hadn't met before, and if you cheated and talked to somebody you came with, that's fine. So there was a method to my madness there, and we'll get into that in a minute. So the 6 human needs, again, this is pulled from one of Tony Robbins' frameworks for behavior, and he theorizes basically, and he's basically proven over time that every action you take is in a pursuit to fulfill one or more basic needs, and most actions are going to fulfill multiple needs. So what are those? They're psychological needs. There's 4 of those. The first one is the need for certainty. So you need to be sure about something. You need things to stay the same. Then there's a need for uncertainty, which might be confusing, but a lot of times you can actually do something that fulfills both the need for certainty and uncertainty. Another good word for uncertainty is variety. So you do something because it's new, because it's changing things up for you. Oh no, spoiler. The need for significance. Who here would consider themselves an achiever? Like a high achieving person and you strive to achieve things? Do you like getting recognition? Do you like getting promotions? And are you ever driven primarily by that? Have you ever been in your career? Okay. Some people aren't. I know I was for the first probably at least 10 years or so of my career. It was all about making more money than my parents made, or getting that next job, or getting that next promotion. And then, once I reached that, I was like, well, now what? Shit.
Let's say, did you actually get there? A lot of people who chase the dollars don't get there, consider.
Yeah, well, it is really interesting. So not to get too much into the personal stuff, but once I hit a certain point, absolutely, it's like my quality of life is where I like it to be. So the money is no longer an issue. And there are studies that show, and this was years ago that I read this, so the numbers probably changed. After $75,000, nation average, the quality of your life and the amount of happiness that you have is not proportionate to the amount of money you make. So there's a certain point for everybody where that significance and that compensation and that, it starts to wane. But a lot of people are very significance driven. And then there's the connection and love. We'll use connection in this context because if we start talking about love, you may have to go to HR. But a lot of people are driven by the need to connect with other people. And to be clear, we all try to meet these needs. There's different priorities and different based on the context and the scenario. Spiritual needs. If you know who this is, we might be best friends. The need for growth. The need to feel like you're developing a new skill. There's a lot of people say if you're not growing, you're dying, right? So the need to constantly be developing some sort of skill, or it might be to develop, your emotional health, your physical health, whatever that may be, but the need to feel like you're actually growing in some area. And the need to contribute to something greater than yourself. And these are classified as the needs of the spirit because generally speaking, people who prioritize these needs, or at least one of these needs over some others, they tend to have a little bit more fulfillment in their life than folks who are like myself. Up until probably 3 years ago, I was basically significance and certainty driven in that order. And I wanted to be the best at whatever it was I was doing. And I also never really wanted to take too many chances. So those two it's an interesting combo because I wanted to strive to get better, but I also didn't want to suck at anything. So maybe think, a little bit after this, or, as I'm kind of rambling on here, what in your professional life or in your personal life do you think that you prioritize just on a general basis? And I need to go back to that because I want to ask, who remembers somebody's dinner that they had last night? Raise your hand. Yeah, sorry, you. Popcorn? I didn't have dinner last night, so. Popcorn, okay. Was that the first time you've had popcorn for dinner?
In a long time.
Okay. So, would you say that maybe that was just you were changing things up then? You were just striving for a little bit of variety, or maybe it was just convenience and you're just like...
Convenient.
Okay, cool. Anybody else?
Home cooked dinner from his wife.
Okay, what'd she make?
So she likes curry, and she made some kind of potato, vegetables with the curry sauce.
Does she make that often?
Well, yes, she does.
Okay. So you see what I'm saying? Like here with the dinner choices, it's like she knows how to make that. She knows that it's good. She knows that you'll like it. You know that you'll like it. So you go back to a little bit of certainty on that, which is a totally great and fine thing. It's a fulfilling that need. Who remembers a vacation that somebody's going to take soon?
He's going to take his daughter off to college and love it.
Nice. So that's some variety for you, and some great connection, right? So you're gonna take a trip, you're gonna be able to spend that time with her and then see her off to college. So you're probably gonna feel a great need for connection there, and it's something brand new for both of you. So this is the point I was trying to make. It's not about figuring out like what you should be trying to meet as far as needs go. It's just recognizing that you're doing so, and this is gonna play into recognizing this in other people as well. I find that if we can do that with ourselves first, it's a lot easier to sort of maybe suss it out in other people and at least sort of take a guess at it. And then from the book, there's 4 primary intents, or again, motivations that, so when people are acting a certain way and behaving, in this case, in a difficult way, you can kind of figure out pretty easily what their primary intent is. And unlike the needs, people can act with multiple intents in mind, but there's usually one that's pretty strong and that's stronger than the other ones. You'll see what I mean. The task-focused needs, 2 of those, get it done. Anybody in here like a stakeholder or an executive for projects? You think maybe that drives you sometimes? Like, come on, guys, just get it done. Get it right. Any architects, QA in the room? You probably care a lot less about getting it done and then getting it nice, clean, tested. And then the people-focused. Getting along. Where are my Scrum Masters at?
A nice stock photo, by the way.
Thank you. I put a lot of time into this. I did mention to a couple people this training, the training that this came from used to be walls of text, so you're very welcome because I was awful at presenting back then. And then the last one is to get appreciation, right? So this kind of ties back a little bit to the significance, right? You maybe want to launch a project, or you want to complete a task or a user story or whatever it may be, so that people are like, hey, good job on that. Maybe that's what you're striving to do. So, I've had people say, well, what if you want to get it done right? Well, yeah, that is definitely a thing that happens, and you do have 2 intents there, but which one is stronger, right? Push comes to shove, are you gonna increase your test coverage? Are you gonna refactor everything? Or are you gonna try to get it out the door and in front of your customers? So it's funny because these things change frequently, which we'll kind of go over. So don't think of this as if you have this intent all the time. Your intent changes, just as the needs you're trying to meet change. So, and they may change frequently. You may have a stakeholder who wants you to get it done. He wants to get that project out the door, and then it doesn't move the metrics that he promised everybody it was gonna move, and then he asks you why you didn't do it right? So be thinking about how those intents can change. How do our needs map to our intents? Or how do our intents, map to our needs? You might look at this and you start to think, okay, get it done, they probably want certainty, get it right, probably want certainty as well. People want to get along, they want connection, they want significance. You could have an intent for any number of needs, right? So in our example, you may have that stakeholder that wants you to get it done because he wants it out there, it's his initiative, he wants some recognition for it, he wants that significance. You may have a product manager who wants to get it done because they hate the project and they want to move on to the next project, right? So they want variety. So they're not significance driven, they're variety driven. Does that make sense? Any thoughts or questions around that? Cool, so what are some of the challenges? Sorry?
The one line that wasn't drawn.
That's because nobody tries to meet contribution. That and I got sick of drawing lines.
And no one wants to be wrong.
If you think it's confusing to look at, it was really confusing to draw those out.
Okay.
Bullets just don't line up. There's 6 and 6.
What's that?
The bullets just didn't line up with the lines.
Yeah.
Oh, there are only 3 bullets on the left.
Let's just get a
Oh, I see. There's one.
I will send you the slides if you'd like to modify them for me.
PowerPoint or?
Yeah. It's Google Slides, and I am the least effective person at making PowerPoint presentations.
No, it's the least effective.
Usually when I'm working on a PowerPoint presentation, I want to get it done. So what are the challenges of identifying intents? Most people aren't as self-aware as you would like them to be, so they don't know what's motivating them. So they may mask their true intents or their true behavior a little bit, and like I said, it's hard for you to like call that out of them and even have like a really bare bones honest conversation because they don't know that they're operating from an intent to get it right and that they're trying to be certain that it's going to be a quality product. They're just doing their job. They're usually reacting to stimuli, right? Like they have some person demanding something from them, so they come over and they're demanding things from you. They don't recognize what it is that they're actually doing. You may have no idea what intent is driving them. And sometimes you're not gonna be able to figure it out. You're not gonna figure out what intent it is. And you may not know the person that well, so you're not even sure what kind of needs they generally try to meet. So what do? Make a guess. Having a starting point that's even inaccurate is better than just spinning and saying this person's just being an a-hole.
All right, what if you know, or at least have a fairly decent idea of what their intent is, but they have annoyed you to such a degree that you no longer care what their intent is, and how do you choke that down? And
that's what we're getting to next. I promise she is not a plant. Yeah, no, we're gonna get into that next. Being able to recognize the intent is the best way to be able to figure out how you're gonna meet them halfway, how you're gonna negotiate with them, right? Because if you know they wanna get it done, there may be no pleasing them, but at the very least, you can at least dial down that difficult behavior a little bit. Like I mentioned before, intent changes all the time. So what are the things that can possibly affect our change in intent? These are just a couple, right? The expectations of people on your team, of your superiors, of your stakeholders, of your shareholders. Where the project is in the project lifecycle, right? Are you just in the inception phase and you're like, this time we're gonna build it right? Or are you in the middle and you're behind and now your intent and your motivations change? Who here has ever painted a room in their house? Raise your hand. You ever start painting that room and you're like, okay, there's gonna be no globs, this is gonna be perfect, and that roller's just going up and down, then you get about halfway through and you're like, I just wanna get this shit done.
that's why I pay people to sleep.
Exactly. So, I mean, think about that like a project, right? You start out, greenfield is the best, and then you get into it and you realize that you're still paying for the sins of your fathers and all these other things. So, project phase will affect people's intent. Work influences, usually people are working on multiple projects or with multiple teams. Again, all those things can change your intent on a dime. And non-work influences. If you're working with somebody who, and this is a grand example, but somebody who maybe just got kicked out of their house and they're separated and they're getting a divorce and they have to move into some apartment and they don't get to see their kids all that much. In their non-work life, they're going to have very little certainty. Right? There's just a lot of change going on. So they may come into work and they may micromanage the crap out of you because they need a little bit of certainty in their life and a little bit of significance. So just to be kind of thinking about that, not to judge people, but just to kind of understand that these things can change and they can change due to any number, thousands of different influences. So here's the good stuff. This is the more actionable stuff. Blending, again, similar to mirroring. So what is it? So, and why is it important? When somebody's behaving difficult, in the example you were talking about, and you guys are at odds, you're essentially, there could be further apart, and nobody is going to negotiate, nobody's going to have a positive conversation with somebody they think is their opponent, right? If you've ever heard the phrase, you're either with me or against me, raise your hand. And if you've ever been guilty of saying, you just don't get it. Anybody? Yeah. The people that you get fed up with and you say, you just don't get it, are they gonna be like, no, I get it, and then they start explaining to you, like, oh, no, you do get it, that's amazing. No, that never happens, right? Like, once you've made that decision that they don't get it, they're just an idiot, and you're explaining things clearly, and they just really aren't comprehending what you're saying. So when you're that diametrically opposed, you're like snipers, across the field, waiting for somebody to just twitch, a little bit. So blending is any action you take sincerely to meet the other person where they're at in order to just reduce some of the differences in you. It's just kind of a little psychological tool or trick. And I say sincerely because if you start using this and you're doing it just to get one over on them or you're doing it just to manipulate them, it's gonna show. And that goes back to using this ethically and not just using it to manipulate people. Blending is something we naturally do. Is anybody here not from Texas or the South, like myself? Okay.
Born or what?
I'm just raised, like born or raised. So I'm from the Northeast. If you couldn't tell, I talk a little quick and I'm a little animated. Have you ever hung out with a friend from the South and you're hanging out with them long enough that you start to kind of talk like them just a little bit? Yeah. No? You're a stronger person than I am. I'll never forget when I started college, I grew up in Pennsylvania, went to college at Florida State, and about 2 months into college, like when I first got there at least, I heard everybody saying y'all and all this stuff, and I was just like, you sound like a bunch of idiots. Like I was so judgmental, I was like, that's such a dumb word. And then like 2 months in, I'm talking to my parents on the phone, I was like, so what'd y'all do yesterday? Son of a bitch. Like, you start to adopt behaviors and the patterns of the people that you like. It's just a natural thing. So if we can do it naturally, subconsciously, can we maybe consciously do that with people that we're opposed to? And the reason this is important is because a lot of times conflict manifests not due to what it is you're saying to one another, but the way you're saying it, the way you present it, the words you use, your tone, all of those things. There's a great story, I think it's in the book, I might have read it somewhere else, about a mother and a daughter who were just completely about to, just like, not literally, but figuratively kill each other. They're at each other's throats all the time. And the mom was a lot like me in that she was animated and she's loud and she's expressive and she talks with her hands. And the daughter is a very reserved, quiet, old soul kind of person. And the mom was so angry with her daughter because she just thought she wouldn't listen and she shut down and she just didn't respect her and didn't pay attention to her. And she was right, she did shut down. But the daughter was shutting down because the mom, it was going all animated and she just got overwhelmed, right? So she didn't want to listen. She tuned her out because she just wasn't being communicated to the way that she wanted to. And generally speaking, if you want to communicate to people, you want to communicate to them the way that they communicate. So they went to a psychologist or a family therapist. They pointed some of this stuff out. They worked with them a little bit. And what they realized was they both wanted exactly the same things in their relationship. They both felt unloved and unrespected or disrespected. And once they started like talking to each other in the way that they wanted to be spoken to, the relationship like improved tenfold. So there's two types of verbal blending we'll go over, or two types of blending we'll go over, I'm sorry. Verbal blending and nonverbal blending. Sorry, I'm like losing my voice a little bit more so than usual. So verbal blending, what are some ways you could blend verbally with somebody?
Mimic their speech patterns.
Exactly. So say y'all. Maybe break the, say y'all sounds like a one word a little bit when I say it. But the tone, so the pitch even that you use. So I've got a pretty deep voice. If I'm talking to somebody difficult who's got a higher pitched voice, maybe I just raise my voice up a little bit. Not 10 octaves up trying to impersonate them. Because if you try to do that, then they're probably gonna think you're making fun of them, and you might be, right? But if somebody talks at a little higher pitch than me, then I can for a little bit raise my voice up a little bit. It's about as high as it goes, actually. The volume. Who here is kind of a loud person, but they work with people who are, they're a little quieter, to where like during stand-up you gotta like walk in and like really hear them. Those kind of people don't like to be talked to like this. They freak out. So if they're a quieter person, you just want to maybe just dial it back a little bit when you're talking with them. Another thing you can do is the pacing of your speech. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, just though, but if they talk loudly, you don't necessarily want to talk loudly with them.
Not necessarily. I'll get into that actually towards the end of the blending section, but that's a very good point. The pacing. I have a very difficult time with this because I talk fast. I'm afraid that if I don't talk fast, I'm not going to be able to get to say what I need to say. I've got a very bad scarcity mindset around time. It's like, oh, it's my turn to speak. Let's get a novel out there. So if you are a fast talker and you're working with somebody who's a slower talker, there's nothing wrong with just slowing it down a little bit. Although that was actually very aggravating for me. And the last verbal blending tool, and again, these are just some examples. The content, the language you use, the phrases, the sayings that you use. If you're talking with somebody and you're arguing about something in Jira, let's just say, or in Trello, and they keep talking about how, let's say you're the product manager and they're a developer, and they keep talking about how the stupid ticket, the acceptance criteria on the ticket wasn't right, and you keep saying, well, I'll go back into the user story and see if I can, and they keep saying ticket and you keep saying user story, like, you're not doing yourself any favors, right? So pick out the terminology that they use that you can use so that you're at least speaking the same language. God only knows, I'm sure most of us work for a company or in an area where they've probably got 5 to 10 different ways and different names for everything. And then another 15 acronyms. But like, there's a million ways to describe these things and these concepts that you're working on. So whatever they're using, just use that. It's not gonna hurt. Any other thoughts on verbal blending from anybody?
You may get to it.
Okay.
But let's say that you're dealing with a rather agitated person. I know my natural tendency is to try to slow them down a little bit and tone it down a little bit.
Yep.
Is that the right thing, or should
Yes.
you be coming up to me?
Yes, and I am gonna get to that.
Okay, good.
I think I should put that at the beginning, because that's a very good point. Nonverbal blending. I really like this because it's really simple. If anybody would prefer that Jason speak, he just left, so you can follow him up to the parking lot. So nonverbal blending. Posture, right? If somebody sits shoulders back and you're kind of a little more closed off, just open yourself up a little bit. Little things, right? If they're slouching, don't slouch and overdo it. Again, you're doing this sincerely in order to try to just like meet them halfway. So if somebody's a big time sloucher, I might just go from this to this, right? Because they're gonna notice a little change in me. Your relative position. I call this picture, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So relative position. Think about the situation we're in right now. Everybody's sitting down, I'm standing up, like I think I'm some hotshot, whatever, right? There's a power dynamic of some sort at play whenever one person's sitting, one person's standing, right? So if somebody's standing and pacing when they're agitated, don't stand up and pace and like, again, to make fun of them, but stand up, be at eye level. Is anybody here not seen like a Law and Order or CSI or like a crime drama? Okay, good. When they get the perp and he's in the interrogation room, is he like standing up and they walk in and they like talk to him face to face? No, he's seated, they come in, they're pacing around, they're up high, and then eventually they get down at his level, and they're, so there's that dynamic at play, right? You've never seen a show like that where a 5'2" cop walks up to a 6'8" convict and like, threatens them, and the convict's like, oh no, you know what I mean? So relative position is important. Think about a time maybe when you were sick and like laid up in bed. Did your significant other or your loved one come up to you and go, you okay? Like, if they did that to you, would you feel like they were, trying to relate and connect to you? But if they crawled in bed next to you and they're like, you doing all right? Like, you're immediately gonna feel that connection better, right? So just change the position. It is a real thing that's super easy and can work easily, or work really effectively. Gestures. Again, we don't want to overdo it, but as you see, I'm doing all this nonsense, and I'm not even sure why I do this, but I talk with my hands. If somebody doesn't talk with their hands, if they kind of talk like this, all I have to do is just knock this nonsense off and talk to them that way, and they're going to feel a little bit less overwhelmed or intimidated by all this pointless movement I've got going on here. I've got a number of names for that picture, but I'm not going to do them because. And these two are definitely about to have a business meeting. Eye contact doesn't mean stare a hole through their brain. It means mirror their pattern a little bit. If they don't look people in the eye when they talk to them, don't stare at them. If they kind of do this and they're back and forth, maybe just dial back. If you're one of those people that stare straight at people, maybe just do that a little bit more. If you don't look people in the eye and they do, look them in the eye. They will respect you, and you will actually match with them a little bit. So, went through a bunch of verbal and nonverbal blending examples. When you're trying this out, pick one and do it a little bit. Do not try to copy all of their behavior, because what will inevitably happen is they will think that you are making fun of them. So, I mean, if we're sitting here talking and I sit down and I start nodding the way that she's nodding and I start talking the way that she's gonna be like, what are you doing, right? So pick one.
Is there a male-female difference between the positioning thing? Because it seems like whenever you sit with a friend at a restaurant, if it's female, we tend to sit at right angles to one another. Guy always wants to see right straight across. Women tend to align, and guys seem to like the eye contact or something.
I mean, I don't know if it's a gender thing so much. It might just be a relationship dynamic thing, like the dynamic of your friendships or your relationships. Some people do, again, it kind of comes back to eye contact. So the positioning dictates their preference for eye contact, right?
So if you're trying to leverage blending to handle a bad behavior, where is the line between managing the bad behavior and enabling the bad behavior by just telling them, look, that's perfectly fine. I mean, at some point in time, if you need stuff too, then there's also this social dynamic of power struggle.
Yes.
So somebody has to come out on top.
Absolutely, and the reason that this is like a two-part talk is because blending precedes what they refer to as redirecting in the book, which is redirecting that bad behavior and the conflict that you have really to a healthier place, right? And I have a little bit of a summary around redirecting at the end, but I mean, as you can see, we're already like 40 minutes in, which means I've been talking for a while. And I haven't quite, I can't get to all the redirecting because it's like a 3 or 4 step process that you need to make sure you get right. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it seems like this is geared towards one-on-one. If you're dealing with multiple people, how do you chameleon multiple people at the same time?
Well, I guess it depends on if you're dealing with a group who, let's just say you've got a team of 5 people and 3 of them are difficult, if you can figure out who kind of is leading and driving that behavior, pick them, right? If you start mirroring everybody, you may look like a sociopath. It's entirely possible.
A lot of this verbal and nonverbal blending is also cultural.
Absolutely.
If you go to Japan and do some of these things, you would be considered very rude.
Right.
Right? So I don't know how many people in here in companies that actually do a lot of stuff overseas, but you've got to understand the culture shift and use this.
Absolutely, and that's why, I would pick something simple and something small, right? This is not an end-all be-all, like, oh my God, I've solved my problem just by slowing down my speech, right? Like this is to unlock the door, essentially. Like they've closed the vault, and you're just trying to get them to maybe open that first lock. Who else has a question?
When we're talking about blending here, we're not talking about I'm going to mirror your bad behavior. It's about I'm going to try and make a relationship with you or a connection with you.
Exactly.
The way that I approach you.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to start behaving poorly the way you are, but instead I'm going to maybe mimic some of your posture, your mannerisms, so that you connect with me and we can have a real conversation.
Yes, that's a very good point. We're not talking about blending and mirroring bad behavior. We are talking about blending with a person who is behaving in a difficult manner, and even that word difficult is all perspective, isn't it? Can you, in looking at some of this and thinking about those intents, think about the time when you've been the difficult person, not even objectively, but just to somebody else? I know that I am all the time. I guess that's the problem with being an executive, is somebody's always mad at me. I'm sure many people can relate to that in the room. So again, it's just to say, I need to connect with you. We're so far apart that no conversation is going to be productive. Let me mirror one aspect of the way you communicate, or sit at your desk with your arms folded, or whatever it may be, right? So you're just opening the door there. Oh, of course not. There it is. The one exception, to touch on your point earlier, you never want to blend and mirror aggressive behavior. If somebody is being overly aggressive and they're yelling at you and they're standing up and they're pointing at you, you do not stand up and point at them back. That is not going to go anywhere healthy. What you want to do in the case where somebody's being overly aggressive is you want to be calm and assertive. And one easy thing to do, just say their name slowly, repeat it, until they calm down. If you sit there and you don't say anything for a while, they're going to think that they're winning, and you're just like, you're the object of their rage. So if instead you sit down, if that's a more comfortable position for you to be passive and assertive a little bit, and you say, this actually happened to me. That was probably about a year ago. It was the first time I did this naturally, and I shocked myself when it was over. I was like, oh my God, that actually worked. I was working with a team, and they had come up with an estimate for a phase of a project that I thought just seemed a little bit odd. So I got the team lead and the product manager, and I think the scrum master and one of their architects, who he and I used to work together on teams all the time, and I started talking with them, and I said something to the effect of, this seems a little bit out of line with what, my boss thought and what I thought it would take, and can you think, are there any any shortcuts in the work anywhere that we can take? And the architect must have heard me say, can you hack it together in a week? Because he stood up and said, they are not going to sacrifice quality on this project. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just like, what do you get so mad about? And I sat there and I said, Daniel. He got done. We talked it over. He calmed down a little bit, and I said, I'm not talking about rushing it out the door so that we've got a ton of technical debt to manage later. You should know me better than that. I'm talking about have we maybe overestimated parts of this? Have we maybe over-architected parts of this in our plan? What is there any give anywhere? And he's like, oh, okay, well, I just wanted to make sure. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And has anybody done this naturally and not even realized it was somebody who's super angry, and you're just you're not even calm down, it's okay. You're just sort of sitting there, you're kind of taking it, and then you just, all right, can we talk now? So that's what you want to do with aggressive behavior. It's really the one exception to mirroring somebody's behavior, because we all know what it looks like when you're fighting with somebody, maybe a spouse or a child or something like that, and then you're both in each other's faces and you're both using your hands wildly. The police get called usually. No, maybe that's just my neighborhood. So a little bonus, and this is kind of what I was touching on earlier. And now looking at this, it's possible that I could work this in the future. Sorry to get into the redirecting, but redirecting is kind of a step-by-step process. And if you get one of the steps wrong, you really can't move on to the next one. And then you sometimes have to go back to a previous step because things don't go step by step, right? We all know that, we work in software. So as a bonus, one of the first things you want to do after you blend with them and you feel like you can actually have a conversation is really understand their point of view, right? I'm trying to think of a good example here. I had a team about 2 years ago. They had a new product manager start, and she came from a client services world. She wasn't really an agile advocate, and she really didn't have a ton of experience with it. And she started as a product manager on this new team, and they were going to be estimating how long it was going to take, I think, to rebuild our homepage. And didn't really have great requirements written out yet. They didn't really have a ton of designs. There were a couple mocks, but not really decently detailed enough designs to know what the chunks of that page were going to be. And there's going to be a lot of dynamic, it's going to be data driven. We had to localize it, globalize it, all that fun stuff, right? So they gave an estimate. She sends an email, which I could have a whole another hour talking about how email is not a good conversational tool, but that's a topic for another day. She sends an email to me, to my boss, who at the time is our CTO, and to our VP of product, and she's like, they said it's gonna take 6 damn weeks to build a homepage. How does it take 6 weeks to build a homepage? And I'm just like, I don't know. You just sent me a number. I literally have no idea, what this is. And I start kind of coming under fire. So instead, I went to her and I said, how did you get this number? She said, they just gave it to me. And we're talking. I said, well, where's the communication that they gave you? She said, oh, well, they sent it to me in an email. And I said, okay, can I read that? And I started going through the email. I'm trying to understand her position and not just be like, look, if they said 6 weeks, it's 6 weeks, right? I'm not gonna do that. I wanna understand why she's angry, because it did seem a little bit off. And we started talking through it. I'm asking questions like, well, when did they send the email? They sent it to me yesterday. Okay, how long do they take to estimate it? And, we started trying to understand. I look at the email, and it turns out the unit of measurement they were using because of the lack of detail was sprints. And they worked in 2-week sprints. And they gave a buffer of 1 sprint due to the lack of certainty. So the estimate they actually gave, and I confirmed this in talking with the team lead later on, the estimate they actually gave was, well, we think we could do it inside of a sprint, but it might be a little bit more, so we said 2 sprints, and then, plus or minus. So she took that, 6 weeks, goes off on a rampage, and really just by asking her and kind of digging into it, I realized, oh, okay, well, then, I don't think it's gonna be 6 weeks then. It looks like it's gonna be 2 to 3, right? So ask clarifying questions, ask them truly to understand, not to judge, right? So you don't wanna be asking like, well, why are you so mad? Well, don't you think that's a silly thing to be mad about? You know what I mean? Like really try to dig in and ask questions to clarify until you think you have a good understanding. And going back to kind of continuing that verbal blending a little bit, use a shared language. Do not at this point start to restate their problem in your own words, because then it feels to them like you're trying to take over the conversation, right? How many people have been trying to understand somebody and way too early on you say, so I think what you're actually saying is, right? And you're trying to reword it completely. All of a sudden they're thinking, no, I said it in my words already. I don't need your language and your vocabulary. Like I'm telling you what the problem is. Why are you trying to change everything up on me? So if they say the stupid ticket doesn't have good acceptance criteria, you don't say, so I think what you're saying is that user story in Jira needs to be fleshed out a little bit more with some requirements. Like, didn't I sound like an asshole just now? Like self-important? So use their language as much as you possibly can. If you're gonna restate the problem to them and say it back to them, use their words as much as you possibly can. And then, once you feel like you understand, and this is a problem I see at my company and in a lot of other companies, who here has left a meeting and not had like a communication plan or an action plan? So you had an hour meeting and then you're just like, okay, we're done, we're at time. And then the emails start. And it's like, well, no, what we said we were gonna do is we were gonna delay that project for 6 months. No, we didn't say it, you know what I mean? So just like you would not end a meeting without a communication plan or an action plan, do not leave this conversation without making sure you're on the same page, right? This is the confirmation portion of that conversation. And this is the point where you can start to use your own language a little bit more. So you would say, all right, so if I understand correctly, you said the ticket doesn't have good acceptance criteria, so I think what I need to do after this is go and talk to the PM to get them to flesh it out a little bit more, make sure that user story is ready for everybody to work on. Does that sound right? Because now you've kind of talked each other down a little bit. And now you can actually say, this is my plan based on what I understand. And they say, yes, that sounds good.
When you just gave that example, is it okay when you're doing the confirmation to then use your own language?
Yes.
Okay. It felt like it was, but it
Yep.
didn't sound pompous, but
Yes, this is after, again, you're asking questions, there's parts of redirecting that are also like, it's a little more nuanced where you're kind of like just repeating back a couple words to them, right? So like the stupid ticket, and the ticket, yeah, you know what I mean? Like the little back and forth, not like just taking your turn to restate an entire sentence. Yep.
Well, there's some value in communicating to them that you totally comprehended or comprehended what they said. If you're just repeating it and using their shared language,
Yeah.
then you're just repeating. If you can show that you're synthesizing into your language, then you can communicate that out. Perhaps it's a matter of phrasing it.
Yep.
What I heard you say was that the user stories need to be fleshed out with some more detail.
Exactly. All I'm saying is when you start to use your own language, just use it later on once you feel like, and this is obviously a feel thing, once you feel like you have a better understanding and they understand you a little bit better and you understand them, you just don't do it right after you're asking the questions, right? So if you're saying, okay, which ticket are we talking about again? Okay, that one. When was that supposed to be worked on next? Okay, and when do you think it should have been ready about? You can start asking those questions. You don't go right from that to saying, okay, so that user story then, we definitely need to add right after.
it sounds like you're correcting them
Exactly. And
rather than just focused on identifying and understanding their issue.
exactly, and remember, we're coming from a place where you were like this far apart, and you just got to like here, you're asking questions, don't jump to, okay, I'm gonna use my own words now.
Well, I mean, I guess if you specify it and let them know that you are purposely using your own words, it's the I statements that therapists like to have you use.
Yep, absolutely.
I feel you make me do this. I see this.
So to use that example then, with a therapist, if you're saying, when I am late to work, I feel guilty because I owe it to my employer to be on time and punctual. They don't turn around and say, so why do you feel bad whenever you're tardy to your job? Like, they use your same words, right? They're like, okay, so when you're late to work, that guilt, really comes into play. They're using the same language. And then maybe when they start talking about a solution or they're leading you a little bit farther down the path, then they can start to use their own words. It's good to do it a little bit at the beginning because it just continues to build that shared understanding. There's an old sales phrase that I love that is, people don't buy from you when they understand you or they understand your product. They buy from you when they feel understood. And in this situation, we're trying to sell not our ideas, but the very idea that we can get along and we can solve this problem, right? So whether you want to admit to it or not, because I always thought sales was a dirty word for years myself, we're all in the business of selling compromise and productivity and good conversations with our coworkers. And if they're being difficult, you got to understand them first and make them feel like they are understood. Then you can start to have that transaction, or whatever you want to call it, that mutually beneficial transaction. Any other thoughts or questions on this stuff? Cool. So, wrap up a little bit. People seem difficult, and this is why I love the title of that book, is Dealing with People You Can't Stand. And once you start getting into it, you realize, wow, some people probably can't stand you sometimes either. And it's not because one person's bad or one person's good. Generally speaking, everybody's intent is pretty pure. And sure, there are gonna be people that are out to get you, but most of the time, people are they have a different motivation than you, And this is something you have to practice a lot. I, on a regular basis, have to be like, God, why are they being such an obstinate son of a, and then I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably under a lot of pressure to get that done because they've got another thing coming up that they really want to work on and that their boss prioritized for them, and they can't do that until we're done with this. So maybe I should go talk to them. They're not just an a-hole. They're trying to get it done. They're trying to move faster, and they're upset that we're not moving at the speed that they would like. Right? Question?
What you presented fully makes sense, and I guess my only concern is, do we do it differently if you've got, I'm a Scrum Master, and deal with product owners all the time.
Yep.
A lot of product owners have no clue about the functionality or back-end changes.
Right.
So sometimes it's a battle just to get through to them. And at what point do you kind of change your methods, or do you get like technical lead get involved?
I don't know that I would necessarily change my methods in this, but like if they don't understand the requirements, they don't understand the inner workings of the system, and I've got this issue too a lot where we've got high tenured developers who know the ins and outs and they know where the bodies are buried in the code, right? And we've got some really junior product owners who they just assume, well, no, I got this thing from design, it's just gonna work. And the designers may not even have a lot of product knowledge, of the platform. So I need to talk with them and understand what their assumptions are, right? It's not that they don't necessarily, that they're dumb and they don't know the product, it's that they're making some assumptions about how it works based on working with UX and working with maybe a developer or two who does or does not know those things. So start asking questions to dig into the assumptions that they made. Bring in a developer who has good people skills.
Or bring in product managers who actually have technical skills.
Right.
So is it safe to say that no matter how hard we try, there is going to be that one a-hole that, okay.
I mean, it's always possible.
I just need a validation because I've been trying all of this stuff.
It is always possible. I've got one coworker, and I'm not going to use his name. I'll call him Steve. That's my brother's name. He won't mind. And he's been at the company longer than I have. He doesn't talk nicely to anybody unless he respects them. I know he doesn't respect me. And it's basically like respecting your technical capabilities. So if you're like as technically brilliant as him or higher, he'll talk to you nicely. And people just all the time like, that's just Steve being Steve. And he just has an obsession with not only getting it right, but being right. Like you have that person that just argue with you because they need to make a point that they're smarter. So sometimes you need to walk away from that conversation, evaluate, is it valuable that we're even having it or not? So.
I'd like to just, a couple of things that have helped my peace of mind and being able to deal with some of this. was number one, learn about the negative attribution tendency that everybody has in psychology. So we all tend to look at it from our end and take it personally, what people do. And a good portion of the time there is a reason behind it, and it's not personal. And so the other part is it's kind of more of a spiritual thing of seeing the greater man, the greater possibility in the people that you're dealing with, and just trying to visualize that. Because both of those will help kind of calm you down, take it out of the personal thing, and maybe have the patience to be able to do all these things.
Yeah, I've kind of demarketized the title of this over time, because it isn't dealing with people you can't stand. It isn't dealing with difficult people. It's dealing with generally good people who are behaving in a way that conflicts with the way you view the world, right? So the behavior's not negative necessarily. It's just they're motivated by different things. I do like that negative attribution concept. There's a really good book that it gets a little woo-woo at parts for me, but it's called The 4 Agreements, and it's super short. It's like, and one of the 4 agreements that you make with yourself is not to take anything personally. Like, even if somebody makes a personal attack at you, they're doing it because of something that they're feeling. So if you can just say, it is their problem, maybe we can solve it. Maybe they're just not gonna respect me ever, and they're just gonna be angry all the time. But I can't control that. I can help to influence it.
It helps the knee-jerk pissed off action.
And we all take things personally anyway. I woke up angry this morning, actually, at something, and I realized, that's really not on me. There's probably some conditions in their life why they didn't return my call, or why they didn't, It's homework, unfortunately, sorry. Don't get out of here for nothing. Think back to the last daily stand-up, daily scrum you had, or the last meeting. Can you think about what somebody's update was or somebody's contribution to that meeting, and can you just identify what their intent might have been? So were they really trying to drive execution and completing the project in a meeting? Were they arguing for more unit tests, more integration tests? And start just kind of see if you can figure out, okay, actually, that developer was definitely trying to add another 100 tests to that module. They're probably trying to get it right because they want to make sure that it's going to be functional and safe and maintainable. And if you couldn't identify the intent, just start to maybe think about what needs they might have been trying to meet with that behavior. Because again, the behavior has an intent, the behavior has needs that you're trying to meet. It's not them as a person all the time, right? Their needs and intents are going to change depending on the context of what they're doing. So that's why you would think back to a particular moment in time. And maybe write it down, maybe not on a whiteboard or anything like that, because that would freak people out. And then number 2, and this is more for you guys, just sort of like, this journey to self-actualization that I feel like a lot of us try to make, is just think about, maybe separate work life and personal life. What needs do you try to meet the most? Like I said, I used to be all significance and certainty. So I would do the same things during the week after work. I never really wanted to go out and try an improv class, or do, I'd watch a lot of the same movies that I loved over and over again, and occasionally watch a new one, right? So I've changed that a little bit, but it's just good to know it and understand it, because you can help to maybe change your own behavior a little bit. Any other questions, comments? Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This is the first time I've done this abbreviated talk, and with not having walls of text to refer to, so I was definitely a little bit nervous. But I really appreciate you guys coming and listening to me ramble.
Thank you very much, Sean, everybody.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions, or if you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, absolutely reach out to me via email at sean@rebase.show. That's Sean, SHAUN, @rebase.show. Or you can always use my Facebook page, which is at facebook.com/Martin Sean P, as in Paul. For show notes, additional content, and more glorious goodies, go to rebase.show/difficult. That's rebase.show/difficult.